escapes me. It's good for us if it supports our work. Does it support our work, aside from getting paid? Someone tell me how.
Okay, we have time for about 2 more questions. So, first of all, Dr. Ramey.
Counseling, this is for Dr. Dwyer. Counseling has humanistic and strength-based roots. In positive psychology now, there is an area that's coming up with the un-DSM, and they're generating a language for positive traits about human beings. And it's a reaction to the DSM, because all this common language you're talking about is language about disorders. And so when you have someone identifying with their diagnosis, they're identifying with something negative, which Dr. Hansen said he thought was a very big problem. So maybe you could comment on the fact that all this common language is sick language, disease-oriented language.
Okay, the question in a nutshell is to please comment on the negative language in just medical type language and labels in the DSM, and maybe a more positive approach might be a useful thing instead.
Very good. I agree with Seligman's approach with regard to positive psychology, and the effort that is being made in positive psychology is an excellent development in our field. But that has yet to unfold. And if they have the potential to develop an un-DSM that has sufficient language that can keep our field communicating effectively with one another using a common language, that may have some utility. But the fact of the matter is, we are still seeing fundamentally the same clients that people in psychiatry and psychology are seeing. And therefore, it is incumbent upon us to be able to communicate in their language as well. So I would not see a contradiction between positive psychology and a language emanating out of that as being in conflict with the pathology language that we have in DSM-4. Both of them may be necessary in different contexts.
Well, I think what you pointed out for me, which I agree with, is that just because it's a common language doesn't mean that the language doesn't have biases inherent in it. Okay? It is a common language, and different professions speak it, as Phil rightly points out. But we have to look at what are the biases inherent in that language. And Llewellyn has pointed out one of them is that it's a pathologizing language. Another is that it's a language that only looks at surface descriptions, only looks at symptoms. And we have to think about, does that language have utility for our purposes? My contention, of course, is that largely it does, because of what our purposes are.
Okay, this is going to be the last question, and I don't know how to choose. Sure, back here.
Mikhail, I just have to take less than a minute asking this question, but some number of years ago, the DSM was used to attach an inaccurate diagnosis to me, and I ended up being involuntarily committed to a mental health ward. And one of my experiences was being part of a daily line of patients who were lined up to see a psychiatrist for sessions of about 1 minute each. And when I attempted to argue or present reasons why I should be discharged, the exact quote from the psychiatrist at the institution about 2 miles down the road was, "Don't you know it always turns out badly when you seek to take up the psychiatrist's time?" So my question is, do you see any way or willingness on the part of psychiatrists, either individually or through their professional associations, to set minimum standards to counter the patient abuse that's rampant in mental hospitals today?
Okay, well, I will invite Dr. Hansen to speak first, but a gist of the question or statement was that the speaker described a negative experience a very negative experience that they had as a result of the DSM and the standard that was not met by a physician or a psychiatrist. So Dr. Hansen, you have the floor first.
I'm sorry you had to endure that. I'd like to frame this conversation a little bit, though. This is a different topic. We're talking about psychiatry now. I was talking about, Phil and I, about counseling. Okay? But to talk about this different topic, psychiatry and its use of the DSM, I think is full of problems too. Phil says the DSM has evolved. Well, to have something evolve means it has to progressively adapt. That's what evolution means. So if you think about who adapted because of the new DSM, it's basically the profession of psychiatry. Now, it sounds like you encountered a bad psychiatrist, and there are good psychiatrists too. So I don't see what happened to you as a direct result of the DSM so much as a result of encountering a bad professional. But does the DSM contribute to the type of interaction you had? Probably in my estimation.
And probably not in mine. Because it is a failure of the personnel using the DSM-4 that led to your situation. And I, like Jim, am very sympathetic to anybody who is abused anywhere, but particularly in the mental health field, that all of us are so committed to improving and trying to lift the burdens that rest upon people's shoulders. So I'm terribly sorry that you encountered a professional person who didn't act in a very professional way, but that does not impugn the DSM-4. It rather reflects poorly on the professional who misused it. Thank you.
Alrighty, at this time I'd like to invite both Dr. O'Dwyer and Dr. Hansen to give their closing arguments, which will be about approximately 2 minutes in length. Dr. O'Dwyer can start.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Chi Sigma Iota for sponsoring this debate, and thanks to all of you for your participation, and thanks to Roberta for moderating this debate so nicely. The competition of ideas is what university education is all about. My opponent today is my colleague, and more importantly, my friend. We are enormously proud that Jim is the third most published author in the Journal of Counseling and Development. We as a faculty are proud of his contribution and his scholarship to the field. However, tomorrow I will see clients and I will use the DSM-4 as a useful document, as will over 2 million clinicians across the country. Notwithstanding our differing perspectives, it remains the standard of practice for the mental health delivery system, from CACREP to the Joint Commission, from the insurance industry to every regulatory agency in the country. DSM-4 is the classification of choice. They are not all in collusion, undermining a better way. No better way has been proposed. You haven't heard a better way today. I look forward with optimism to May 2013, when DSM-5 is expected to be launched. In my view, the DSM-4, like the Bible and the Constitution, may have their critics. But on balance, I think you will agree with me that the DSM-4, while it may be imperfect, is useful. It is the ultimate book of human troubles. that offers clarity to mental disorders, direction to clinicians, and structure to clinical practice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Chi Sigma Iota, Roberta, and thanks, Phil. I agree with Phil that this kind of thing should go on more often. Civil debate is what causes thinking to evolve, and mine certainly has from debating Phil for many years about many different topics, so I'm appreciative for that. I don't agree with him about the DSM for counselors. He hasn't said anything today to persuade me otherwise. What I hear him saying again and again is that many, many people are using it. Many smart people developed it, and they've been using it for a long time, and he'll use it tomorrow. Now, has it ever occurred in human history where a lot of people thought something was a good idea, and then when you look back on it, we said, oops, not such a good idea? That has occurred. And it's going to occur again about the DSM. So what I would invite you to do is think critically about mental health culture and the DSM. And Phil has really helped us do that here, taking the other side. And to continue to think critically. My bottom line with the DSM is, bottom line question is it good for counselors? It would be good for counselors if it helped support the ingredient of counseling that is responsible for outcomes, which is the relationship. So ask yourself, do categorical systems support relationships? Then you can decide for yourself whether the DSM is good for us to adopt or not. Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, this concludes today's debate. I wanted to thank Dr. Hansen, thank you, Dr. O'Dwyer, thank you, for sharing your beliefs on the DSM. And thank you to the audience for your thought-provoking questions. It is my hope that today is just a starting point for our conversations, and that conversations on this important topic will continue between students, faculty, and practitioners in the counseling community. Joseph Joubert, a French essayist, once said, "It's better to debate a question without settling it than to settle a question without debating it." So we'll leave you with that. Instead of assigning a winner or loser today, I would like to invite you to raise your hand if your opinions on the DSM have been shifted, altered, or if you're more knowledgeable about it, because that's how we would like to measure the success of today's debate. So please raise your hand. Thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Okay, are there any closing announcements from CSI? Molly, is she in the room? Oh. And here's Molly. She's our president-elect for Chi Sigma Iota.